My name is Rachel Adler. I'm 36 years old, and for most of my life I was the daughter my family called on when something needed fixing. Not celebrating, fixing. That distinction took me over a decade to understand, and it finally became impossible to ignore on the night of my father's retirement dinner. My father, Gerald, had spent 32 years building a mid-sized construction firm from a single pickup truck and a business loan he never fully explained. My younger brother, Dean, had worked at the company for the last 8 years, holding a title that changed every few months, but never seemed to come with real responsibility. I had never worked there. I built my own career in financial compliance, the kind of unglamorous, detail-obsessed work that nobody praises at dinner parties, but that taught me to read a document the way other people read a room. The retirement dinner was held at a banquet hall outside Denver, 60 guests, a slideshow of my father's career, and a toast that Dean delivered with visible pride, thanking our parents for trusting him to carry the company forward. I sat near the back with my husband, clapping along with everyone else, waiting for my own name to come up somewhere in the speech. It never did, not once. 32 years of a company my father had built, and the only child mentioned by name, thanked, and publicly handed a future was Dean. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself the same thing 3 weeks later when my mother called to ask if I could help out with something quiet, reviewing some paperwork for my father's transition into retirement, just to make sure everything was in order before he signed. She said it like a favor, the kind of small errand a family does for each other. I said yes, because saying yes was the role I had always played. The documents arrived in a manila envelope, not digitally, not through a lawyer's office, but hand-delivered by my mother over coffee at my kitchen table. She sat across from me, stirring sugar into a cup she never drank, while I opened folder after folder of transition paperwork, articles of incorporation, updated ownership structures, a revised operating agreement for Adler Construction LLC. I am, by profession, the kind of person who reads the fine print for a living. It took me 4 pages to notice that my name did not appear anywhere in the ownership transition. Not as a minority shareholder, not as an heir with a deferred interest, not even as a footnote. The entire company, every asset, every account, every piece of equipment my father had spent 3 decades acquiring, was being restructured to transfer 100% of ownership to Dean upon Gerald's official retirement, effective the following month. I asked my mother, carefully, why my name wasn't listed anywhere. She told me, without meeting my eyes, that the company was always going to go to whoever worked in it, and that my father felt it wouldn't be fair to give me a stake in something I didn't build. I reminded her that I had spent 4 years, unpaid, doing the company's books during a period when they couldn't afford an accountant, back when I was 24, and just starting my own career, squeezing spreadsheets in between my own 12-hour days. She said that was just helping family, not the same as building something. I didn't argue. I had learned a long time ago that arguing with my mother in real time never worked. She would simply outweight me, repeat the same 3 sentences until I ran out of energy, and declare the matter settled. So I said I understood, thanked her for the coffee, and asked if I could keep copies of the documents, just to have on file. She hesitated but agreed, likely because refusing would have looked strange for something she was calling routine paperwork. That night, after she left, I didn't cry, and I didn't call anyone to vent. I opened my laptop and started building a folder. I have always been the kind of person who processes injustice through documentation rather than confrontation, and something about seeing my exclusion written into a legal contract, in black and white, with a lawyer's letterhead at the top, made the feeling less like heartbreak and more like a case file waiting to be built. Over the next 2 weeks, I went back through 11 years of family financial history that I had, without realizing it, been quietly collecting my entire adult life. The kind of records a person keeps not out of suspicion, but out of habit, because compliance work trains you to save everything. Tax documents my parents had asked me to help them organize during an audit scare 6 years earlier. Bank statements I had reviewed when my father worried about a possible embezzlement issue with a former employee. A power of attorney form I had helped my mother fill out after a minor stroke scare, back when I was the only one who answered the phone at 11 at night. What I found, laid out across a decade instead of a single moment, was not a story about a father simply choosing to reward the child who worked in his business. It was a story about a company that had, at multiple points, survived because of money, that had quietly moved out of accounts that were legally supposed to be mine. My grandmother, my father's mother, had died when I was 26 and left a modest trust behind, split evenly between my father and his sister, with instructions that a portion be held for me and my cousins as the eldest grandchildren, to be distributed at 30 or upon marriage, whichever came first. I remembered signing something around that time. My father had told me it was a formality to consolidate the trust into the family account for tax efficiency, and I had signed it without reading it closely, because I trusted him, and because at 26, in the middle of building my own career, I had no reason to imagine that trust as anything other than family money being handled by family. Sitting at my kitchen table a decade later, cross-referencing old statements against company filings I had helped organize during that audit scare, I found the trust distribution that should have come to me at 30. It never arrived. Instead, the timeline showed a transfer into Adler Construction's working capital account, dated 18 months after my grandmother's death, during a period I now remembered clearly, a stretch when the company had nearly folded after losing a major contract, and my father had told the family, in hushed tones, that he'd found a way to keep everyone afloat. At the time, I had admired him for it. Sitting there years later with the documents in front of me, I understood that the way he'd kept everyone afloat was mine. The number wasn't small. Between the diverted trust distribution and 2 additional transfers I traced through years of statements, one tied to a company vehicle purchase, another to a down payment on the building that now housed Adler Construction's main office, the total came to just over $210,000, moved out of accounts meant for me, over the better part of a decade, without my knowledge or consent. I did not confront anyone right away. I made an appointment with an estate and trust attorney, brought every document I had, and asked her, plainly, to tell me whether what I was looking at was a misunderstanding or something else. She read through the folder for nearly 2 hours while I sat in her waiting room. When she finally called me in, she didn't soften anything. She told me the diverted trust distribution alone was likely actionable, that the power of attorney I had helped my mother fill out years earlier gave me standing to request a full accounting of any transactions made under it, and that the ownership restructuring currently in progress, the one excluding me entirely, would make recovering my share significantly harder if it was allowed to finalize. That was the moment the situation stopped being a family disappointment and became a deadline. I asked the attorney to draft a formal letter requesting a full accounting of the trust and the power of attorney transactions, addressed to my father, copied to the family's estate lawyer. I did not send it through the family group chat. I did not call my mother to warn her. I mailed it, the way you send something you intend to be taken seriously. The response came 3 days later, not from my father, but from Dean, who called me directly and opened with, "What are you trying to do to Dad's retirement?" I told him calmly that I was requesting an accounting of money that legally belonged to me, and that if everything had been handled properly, the accounting would simply confirm that. He told me I was choosing money over family, and that I was always the one who made things complicated. I let him finish, and then I asked him one question. Did he know, when he agreed to become sole owner of the company, that part of its capital had come from a trust distribution that was never delivered to me? He didn't answer. The silence told me more than any answer could have. 2 weeks later, my mother showed up at my house unannounced, the way people do when they've decided that a phone call gives you too much room to say no. She stood on my porch holding a photo album, the kind with peeling plastic sleeves, and told me she wanted to remind me what family means before I did something we couldn't undo. I let her in, mostly out of habit, and sat with her while she flipped through pages of birthdays and holidays, narrating each one as evidence of a closeness I was apparently at risk of destroying. What she didn't expect was that I had spent the 2 weeks before her visit doing the same thing with my own photo archive, the digital kind, going back through 15 years of family events with the same eye I had once used to review other people's financial statements. And once I started looking at the pattern instead of the individual moments, it became impossible to unsee. In nearly every photo, from a company milestone, a new contract signing, an equipment purchase, the ribbon cutting on the new office building, funded in part by my grandmother's trust, I wasn't there, or I was standing at the edge, half cropped out, present only because I happened to be visiting for some unrelated reason. I had built spreadsheets that quietly propped the business up during 3 separate financial scares, and I existed in the family record as a footnote to celebrations I had, in more ways than one, paid for. I didn't say any of that to my mother on my porch. I simply thanked her for coming, told her I loved her, and repeated that I still expected a full accounting of the trust. She left more frustrated by my calm than she would have been by an argument, because calm gave her nothing to push against. The accounting, when it finally came, took another 6 weeks and one formal demand letter threatening a subpoena of the trust's financial records. When it arrived, it confirmed everything the attorney and I had already traced: the diverted distribution, the vehicle purchase, the building down payment, all funneled through the business under my father's discretion as trustee, all without my knowledge, and all technically outside the bounds of what the trust document allowed him to do without my written consent as a beneficiary. I did not sue my father. I want to be honest about that, because the version of this story that would be easiest to tell is one where I marched into a courtroom and made him pay for every dollar with interest. What I did instead was negotiate, through the attorneys, a settlement that returned the value of the diverted trust funds to me directly, adjusted for the years they had been used without my consent, paid out of the company's now restructured ownership rather than my father's personal accounts, since it was the company that had ultimately benefited. Dean's ownership stake was reduced to reflect that settlement. My name still isn't on the company. I didn't ask for it to be. I never wanted to run a construction business. I wanted, finally, an honest accounting of what had actually been built, and by whom. My relationship with my parents is different now, not severed, but changed in a way that neither of us pretends is temporary. My mother still sometimes describes what happened as me turning something small into a legal battle, and I've stopped correcting her, because I've realized that some people will always need the story to be about my reaction rather than their choices. My father has never apologized directly. What he did instead, 6 months after the settlement, was mail me a small wooden box that had belonged to my grandmother, containing a handwritten letter she'd left for her grandchildren, one I had never known existed, in which she wrote that she hoped whatever she left behind would help each of us become exactly who we already were, not who someone else needed us to be. I keep that letter in the same folder where I kept the trust documents, the settlement, and every bank statement I once organized out of nothing more than habit. Not because I need the reminder of what was taken, because I need the reminder that noticing quietly, for years, without making a scene, was never a weakness. It was simply how I learned, eventually, to see clearly enough to ask for what was already mine.